Welcome back to Backspace Academy. In this lecture, I'm going to be running through the AWS Free Tier, and the vast majority of this course will be operating under that free tier. So if you do get a bill from AWS, it's going to be a very small one. One thing that is not covered under the free tier is the purchase of a domain name. So if you're doing a websites lab that requires a purchase of a domain name and you don't want to pay for that, make sure you do all of the components of that lab except for purchasing a domain name, and you'll still get the same educational experience. To get to the AWS Free Tier webpage, you just go to the AWS domain and then just do /free on the end of it. Or you can go to pricing and then AWS Free Tier. Now, there are a number of different types of offers that are available on the free tier. So what we have here are free trials. So those will be for a specific period of time, not necessarily for 12 months. You need to be careful with those because they are generally quite expensive resources. And if they go for 2 months, you need to make sure that you tear them down well before that 2 months is up. We have ones that are 12 months free. So that is 12 months from the point where your account was created. So if your account is less than 12 months old, then these will be 12 months free, provided you stay under the requirements for those resources. So there will be specific requirements as far as size and type of resources that you can use for that. Also, we have always free. So a lot of services are always free, provided you stay under a certain level of demand for those resources. So I'll just scroll down now to the free tier details. And I'm just selecting here the 12 months free ones. Amazon EC2, we've been using that quite a bit in the course so far. So the 12 months free offer, if our account is less than 12 months old, we're going to get 750 hours per month of EC2, Linux or Windows instances, provided they are a T2 micro or a T3 micro. One thing to take into consideration here is that is specific to those instances, the T2 micro and the T3 micro. If you select a smaller instance, such as a T2 nano, that will not be covered, even though it's smaller than that. And of course, instances that are bigger than that will not be covered either. And other instance types will not be covered. It is specific to T2 micro and T3 micro instances. Now that 750 hours is cumulative. So if you have 2 of the instances running, then you'll be consuming double the rate. So you'll be consuming 2 hours per hour of instance time there. And if you've got 4 instances operating, then you're going to be consuming that at 4 hours of EC2 per hour that you're operating those 4 instances. So you need to take that into consideration. But again, we've got 750 hours per month, which is a lot and more than enough to cover this course. Amazon S3, we're going to get 5 gig of standard storage, and we're going to get 20,000 requests of get and put. So that's great, and it's more than adequate for what we need for the course. Again, RDS, 750 hours, similar to the EC2. It's specific to DBT2 micro instances. Another thing, it doesn't cover Aurora. It's only for MySQL, Postgre, Maria, Oracle, bring your own license Oracle, that is, and SQL Server. So you need to take that into consideration as well. Amazon CloudFront will be using that quite a bit with our websites lab. We're going to get 20,000 requests and 50 gig of data transfer out. That's going to be more than adequate for what we need for the labs. Let's have a look at the always free ones. DynamoDB, 25 gig of storage, 25 provisioned write and read capacity units. That's going to be more than enough to handle 200 million requests per month. Lambda again, it's going to be able to up to 3.2 million seconds of compute time per month, 1 million free requests per month. We're not going to go through that in the lab, that's for sure. And there's others there. Amazon SES, we've already used that as well. 62,000 outbound messages per month is free. Now, the thing about these is that these are always free. So even if your account is over 12 months old, it will always be free. So if you're looking for a solution for your website to send emails, and you're not going to go over 62,000 outbound emails per month, then Amazon SES is a great service to use. It's going to save you quite a bit of money, and it's going to be a high speed, highly available service as well. So these are really good to take into consideration because, again, they don't expire after that 12-month period. Let's have a look at some trials here. So these are the ones that I think that you need to be very careful with because they can be quite expensive resources. If you have a look at here, we've got 250 hours of a MLT3 medium. That's quite a big instance. And so that if you go over that 250 hours per month, that will cost you quite a bit. So be careful with these trials. They don't go for the 12-month period there, or they've got other restrictions such as this one is 250 hours per month. Light Sail has a 3-month free trial. Guard Duty has a 30-day free trial here. So these really vary a lot, and you need to really look into what you're getting for free, how long it lasts, and what capacity you have to use before you start getting billed. So this is a good website to have a look at if you're looking to play around with AWS and some obscure service that you want to use. Go to the free trial and see if it's available there, or see if it's available under your 12 months free or always free. But it's a great resource to have a look at, and it's going to save you quite a bit of money. So that's the AWS Free Tier. I hope you got a lot out of it, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Welcome back to Backspace Academy. In this lecture on cloud economics, we'll look at all of the tools that are available to present a business case for using the AWS cloud. We'll start off by talking about the 6 advantages that AWS define of cloud computing. Then we'll talk about the AWS pricing calculator, which allows you to estimate the costs on a monthly and yearly basis of using AWS services. Then we'll look at the migration costs and the tools that are available to allow us to look further into other areas of costs, such as overheads, including labor, electricity, and the like. And they can help us to accurately assess the benefits of AWS as opposed to using our own on-premises servers. We'll look at the Amazon Inspector, which is an expert system which allows us to look into our existing infrastructure and identify areas of opportunity and areas of risk. Then we'll look at compliance and all of the tools and resources that are available to help our business to remain compliant with a number of different industry standards. And finally, we'll look at all of the available support options for us when we're using the AWS cloud. AWS defines 6 advantages of cloud computing. The first one there is that we're going to be trading a capital expense for a variable expense. So in the past, we would have had to put forward a capital expenditure request to management to purchase these servers, to have them installed, to have them maintained, all of that sort of thing. And then by the time we've gone through that process, we may have to go back and redo that all again because we've run out of capacity already. And this way, we're going to be swapping that for a variable expense that is going to be able to react according to our business needs. Next, we're going to benefit from the massive economies of scale of using this enormous AWS cloud. And those costs that are associated with that AWS cloud are shared amongst millions of users. And so we're not going to be getting a big variation in these costs. It's going to be quite stable over the long term. Next, we can stop guessing capacity. We're going to have an elastic infrastructure that can vary according to our needs. We don't need to guess our capacity to purchase fixed assets. We are going to be using a service that is going to be able to accommodate our needs into the future. Next, we're going to be increasing our speed and agility to get our services and products to market quickly. We can launch an infrastructure on AWS within minutes, and we can be up and running in a very short amount of time. Next, we're going to stop spending money on running and maintaining our data centers on premises. This is a big one because there are a lot of overhead costs that we may not take into consideration when we're implementing an on-premises solution. And that could be anything from insurance costs to security costs as far as physical security. It could be electricity, a whole heap of things that go into maintaining and running that data center. And finally, we can go global in minutes. The AWS cloud has data centers across the globe, and we can launch within any part of the globe within a very short amount of time. AWS also defines 4 key values to use when you're building a business case for migration over to AWS. The first thing there, of course, is the cost savings. You're going to be changing from an upfront capital investment over to a pay-as-you-go pricing model. And that is going to allow you to free up that budget and that cash in that budget you've got now for investment elsewhere. The next one there is staff productivity. Your staff are no longer going to have to worry about the nuts and bolts of managing physical servers, and those teams of staff can work on higher value activities such as providing better customer service. Next, your infrastructure will be far more operationally resilient. You can take advantage of the reliability of the AWS global infrastructure. That will mean that your network will go down less often. And when it does go down, the use of multiple availability zones means that the time that it goes down will be very short, pretty much instantaneous back up and running. And also, AWS has a broad suite of security services that are going to provide the maximum security for your infrastructure. And finally, your business will be more agile. Because AWS has out-of-the-box solutions that are proven, you can get these deployed with simply the click of a button. For example, if you wanted to create a user account system, you can simply use Cognito. Or if you want to have a complicated GraphQL backend for your database deployments, then you can use AWS AppSync. And again, these are out of the box, proven and reliable, and you don't have to worry about developing this stuff yourself. And that's going to allow you to come up with very innovative ideas and get them to the market very quickly. The AWS pricing calculator allows us to estimate the monthly and annual costs of using individual AWS services. Now, please note, this was formerly called the Simple Monthly Calculator. So any references to the Simple Monthly Calculator simply means the AWS pricing calculator. If you want to have a hands-on look at the AWS pricing calculator, and I recommend you do that, just go to calculator.aws. The first step after opening up the pricing calculator is that we need to select the service that we're going to be using. And there are a number of services there available. Pretty well the vast range of services that you can get on AWS will be available here on the pricing calculator. After we've selected our service, and we can see here we've got the EC2 service up, we can start to define what we're going to be using on that EC2 service. So we can define what the instance type is, what the operating system is, and that sort of thing. We've also got the option there of an advanced estimate, and that's going to allow us to put more information. For example, there we can see that we can put in the workload. So it's going to be constant usage or whether we're going to have spikes in demand and that sort of thing. And so we can base our estimate on a schedule or on a consistent usage, whatever that may be. And once we've put in all of our information about that service, we'll get our estimate. And we can see here we've got the first 12 months is going to cost us $1,500 US. We're going to have a total upfront expenditure there and a monthly cost. So we can save that and we can share it with other people. We can export it to Microsoft Excel as a CSV file if we like. And so that is a very quick and easy way. If we know what services we're going to be using and how we're going to use them, it's a great way to get a good estimate of what our ongoing costs are going to be. The AWS Price List API, it allows you to programmatically query for the prices of any available AWS services using either JSON with the Price List Service API, which is also known as the Query API, or with HTML using the Price List API, which is also known as the Bulk API. It can also enable SNS notifications so that your application can get alerts when prices for services change. This allows you to create powerful forecasting applications built around the latest AWS services and resources that are available based upon the latest AWS pricing. When you're comparing the costs of running an on-premises data center as opposed to running a virtualized environment on the AWS cloud, you need to take into consideration all of the costs, the total cost of ownership of that solution, or TCO for short. Now, TCO, it provides an estimate of all of the expenses that are involved in not only the upfront purchasing, but also the operating of that equipment, all of the overheads involved in operating the equipment over its entire life cycle. There are four main cost centers involved within the total cost of ownership model. The first one there is server costs, then storage costs, network costs, and finally the IT labor costs. Within server costs, we're going to have the cost of that physical server. But we're also going to have the cost of software and any licensing and maintenance of that software that may be required. Within storage, again, we're going to have that hardware cost, but we're also going to have a storage administrative cost. Are there backup costs involved in that? Do we need to have backup software involved within that storage cost as well? We also have network costs. So we're going to have our network, our internet, our local area network. We're going to have load balancing, but we're also going to have network administration costs involved as well. And finally, our IT labor costs for server administration, for virtualization as well. So not only are we going to have people that are going to be experts in managing the physical hardware, but we also may need to have people that are also experts in looking after VMware solutions as well. And within those first three of server, storage, and network costs, those physical costs, running those are going to incur an overhead cost as well. They're going to require space. They're going to require somewhere to store those servers. They're going to have power, and they're also going to need to be cooled as well. So we need to make sure that those overhead costs are included as well. The AWS Migration Evaluator, which was formerly called TSO Logic, is a complementary service to create data-driven business cases for migration from on-premises data centers over to the AWS cloud. The way it works is it will monitor your existing on-premise systems, and it will collect that data, and it will look at the costs involved in that, and it will automatically allow you to build a very complex business case for migration over to AWS. The way the migration evaluator works is that a server will be set up on your on-premise data center, and that will collect information from your systems, be it VMware, Hyper-V, whatever it may be. It will collect data in real time from those servers that you've got on premises, and then it will store that data that has been collected in a MongoDB database, and that data will then be used to create these data packages, and those will then be uploaded to the AWS cloud into an Amazon S3 bucket. Once that's done, you can go into the migration evaluator and you can fetch a report that will compare all of the costs, the total cost of ownership of your existing on-premise solution based on this data that has been collected and any other information on costs that you have been providing, and it will compare that to the costs involved of that same solution on the AWS cloud. Another good tool that you can use in the early stages of selling a migration solution to your senior management is to use the Cloud Adoption Readiness Tool, or CART for short. And this is a very quick online survey where you complete 16 questions, and then an assessment report will be generated for you. And that will detail your organization's readiness for a cloud migration across 6 perspectives. And those are being business, people, process, platform, operations, and security. Here we see we've got a radar chart that is produced by the CART tool, and that will show visually where you are now as opposed to where you can get to in your cloud readiness. And here we can see for the business perspective, we've got 2 questions here. One for the business rationale and also for business case. And so based on what we've answered for that question, we have a rating. And so down there we can see that what are the recommended actions that we need to do to get us from that low rating up to a higher rating. And we see there we can review the AWS white papers on cloud economics and TCO, and also the simple monthly calculator. So not only are we looking at where we are now and where we want to get to in the future, it's also defining what actions that we need to take to get there as well. AWS, they define some best practices to achieve a successful cloud migration. The first one there is to make sure that the stakeholders and your senior management or senior leaders are aligned. Now, this may require you to inform and educate your senior management on what your stakeholder requirements are, and making sure that everyone understands what all of the key stakeholders need to get out of this migration. And this is very important when you're dealing with senior leaders who may not be part of the IT department. Getting them to understand all of the stakeholder needs and what you're trying to do to achieve this solution that provides that for them will ensure that decisions are made quickly without any conflict. The next one there is to set top-down quantifiable goals. And these need to be clearly defined with clear objectives that can be measured and are quantifiable. It's no point having something that is very wishy-washy. You need to have something that is clear and direct and can be quantifiable in the end. And then you can expand from that and introduce more specific goals and more specific tasks that are involved to achieve your end. Next, we need to trust the process. AWS has been in this business for a very long time, and they are the biggest player around. And their processes for migration are the best. And that involves assessing where you currently are and where you want to get to, and creating a mobilization plan to achieve that. Then implementing that migration and taking advantage of any opportunities to innovate and modernize your architecture. Next, within your migration process, you need to make sure that you choose the right migration pattern. And there are 7 R's to achieve that. So the first one there is to refactor, and that involves the most amount of effort, and that is going to completely redesign your entire architecture and all of the underlying infrastructure that is involved within that. The next option there is to re-platform. For example, going from, Windows Server to Linux, going from Oracle database over to Aurora database. The next option there is to repurchase. So to do what you're currently doing, but repurchase. So if you've got a file server, simply repurchase an upgraded version of that file server. The next option there is to rehost, and that is a lift and shift. So you're going to look at what you've got existing there now and simply move that to another location. The next one there is to relocate your virtual infrastructure. So that could be on VMware or Hyper-V, and allowing that to move from one location to the other. It could be to AWS or it could be to another physical server, for example. Next, we can simply retain what we've got and do nothing. And finally, we can simply retire the entire system. We don't need it anymore and we can get rid of it. When you're developing your migration plan, it's a good idea to go to the AWS Prescriptive Guidance website, and that's located at the AWS domain /prescriptive-guidance. And what that is, it's a portal of a whole heap of PDF documents that contain time-tested strategies, guides, and patterns from both AWS and AWS partners that can help you accelerate cloud migration, modernization, or optimization projects. So for example, if you've got a migration job where you want to migrate from Microsoft SQL Server to the AWS cloud, what you can do is search for that on the Prescriptive Guidance website. You will find, no doubt, a PDF document that will detail the process that you need to go through and also any of the issues that you may encounter. And that's going to help you to produce a much better migration plan. Another great way of reducing those costs of IT labor and resources is to use an expert system such as the Amazon Inspector. And what that is, it's an automated security assessment service. So instead of having a team of people going through your AWS infrastructure and identifying any weaknesses or opportunities within that, the Amazon Inspector can do that automatically for you. And that allows you to reduce the costs and increases the efficiency of conducting security assessments and maintaining compliance with any third-party compliance programs. The pricing starts at 30 cents per agent assessment per month. But if you're using it quite a bit, you can take advantage of volume discounting, and that will allow you to achieve as low as 5 cents per agent assessment per month. So the Amazon Inspector, a great service to really identify any critical areas within your infrastructure and also any areas of opportunity, not only in security, but also in performance as well. The AWS Compliance Program covers a very broad range of certifications, laws and regulations, and frameworks that AWS is compliant with or can help you to become compliant with. For example, there we've got ISO 9000, we've got the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard as well that AWS is compliant with. We've got the HIPAA standard there that AWS can help you to become compliant with as well. One thing that you need to understand is that AWS may be compliant with a standard, or it may be providing a compliance enabling service that can enable you to be compliant with a standard. A good example of that for a compliance service would be PCI DSS Level 1. AWS is compliant with that standard. ISO 9001, again, AWS is fully compliant with that standard as well. Another compliance enabling service that AWS provides is for the HIPAA standard. And the reason that AWS cannot provide you with a HIPAA certification as such is because the HIPAA standard goes into much more than just your back-end services. For example, you may have a HIPAA application, some software that you have developed, and that is running on AWS, and the AWS side of things is completely compliant, but your actual software may have issues and it may not be compliant. And so from that perspective, AWS has provided everything that they can for you to enable compliance, but you still need to do your end of it to get that HIPAA certification. AWS Artifact is a central resource for compliance-related information on AWS. It provides on-demand access to AWS's security and compliance reports and also selected online agreements. Some of the reports that you can download include SOC or PCI reports. And those are accessed quite simply by going to the AWS Management Console and selecting the report that you want, or searching for that report and then selecting it and then downloading that report. Okay, so when you go to the Management Console and select AWS Artifact, you can go to the Report section. You can search on a report. And so here we are searching for the PCI reports, and we can see there that we've got one, a PCI Attestation of Compliance, or AOC report. We simply select that and we download that report. When we click on Download Report, it will actually not download the report itself, but it will download the non-disclosure agreement for AWS Artifact. And attached to that, if you open it in Adobe Acrobat and you click on the paperclip, you can see that attached to that will be the reports that you want. And by clicking on those links, you will be able to see those reports and download those, or print them out, or do whatever you want with those. It is one thing to be compliant with a standard at a point in time, and it's another thing to be able to maintain compliance with that standard when your infrastructure is changing and your software is being updated. And so that's where AWS Config comes in. And what it is, it's a configuration management service running on AWS, and allows you to assess, audit, and evaluate the configurations of your AWS resources. It achieves this by continuously monitoring and recording any changes in your configuration on AWS based on pre-built rules. Now, those rules are supplied by AWS, but you can modify those to suit you as well. Those rules can be applied to both network and software configurations. So if you do an update to software, and that change is something to do with compliance based on those rules, then that will you will be alerted to that change. Multiple rules can be organized into a conformance pack to better organize these rules. And any changes that appear can be identified quickly by simply going to the AWS Management Console and going to the Cloud Governance dashboard and seeing those changes. It has multi-account and multi-region data integration. And so you can apply this across multiple accounts, across multiple regions. It is integrated with AWS organizations, so you can set up a conformance pack and apply that to all of your accounts within your organization. There are a number of different support plans available from AWS to help you out when you get into trouble. That consists of basic, developer, business, and the top of the line there is enterprise. And they vary from free, and that is purely and simply customer service only. There's no technical service. So if you've got a problem with your billing, for example, then you can get free support on that. But if you want to get technical support, then you're going to have to pay for that. And so developer is the base of that support plan for pay plans. And that's going to give you up to 12 hours response to critical failures, working up to enterprise, which is 24/7 technical support from a senior engineer. And that will have response to less than 15 minutes to any critical failures. From my experience personally with AWS support is that these response times that they quote, for the most part, they do deliver on, but quite often they don't deliver on. So again, if you've got an enterprise there and it's saying less than 15 minutes response, it may take them a lot longer than 15 minutes to actually sort out your problem. But it is a very good service to pay for. And certainly if you're part of a large organization, you certainly should have, at the very least, a business support plan. If you want to get more details about these support plans, go to the AWS website /premium support /compare-plans. If you have a difficult application that you're trying to deploy on AWS, you may want to consider using the AWS Professional Service, and they are a global team of AWS experts. They work as a collaboration between the client and an AWS partner network or an APN partner and the AWS Professional Services team. So if you've got this large application that you want to deploy, then you would engage an APN partner, and then the APN partner would work with the AWS Professional Services team to sort out all of those issues for you. The professional services use a number of different offerings that use a unique methodology based on Amazon's internal best practices, and they help you to complete your projects faster and more reliably. The professional services can provide experts in a specific area of AWS, and they have global specialty practices that can support your efforts in focused areas of the enterprise cloud computing. For example, you might want to obtain the services of a machine learning expert or an Internet of Things or a specific database expert, and AWS Professional Services can make that happen for you. AWS Managed Services consist of AWS Cloud experts, and they can provide help with migrating and operations assistance, such as with monitoring of incidences, with security, with patch management, and that sort of thing. These AMS Cloud experts work alongside AWS partners and also with your own operations teams. It leverages a growing library of automations, configurations, and runbooks for many use cases. And by doing that, it provides enhanced security and cost optimization, because the AWS managed services are going to make sure that you are operating with AWS best practices. If ever there was a good reason for getting certified with AWS, AWS IQ for Experts has to be the best. It's a marketplace for people that are AWS certified. So you need to have an active AWS certification. It has to be at the minimum of an associate level. So it needs to be either an associate, professional, or specialty certification. And it enables you to get paid for work that you complete for customers within their AWS account. Now, it's not available in all countries. It was first rolled out only in the US. And so to use that service, you need to have US tax details and a US bank account. But it is currently being rolled out to other countries as well. If you want to find out more about AWS IQ for Experts, go to the Amazon or the AWS domain /IQ/experts. How it works is that you first create a profile which will have all of your details, your photo, your certifications and qualifications. Once that profile is up, that's going to enable you to connect with customers and communicate directly with customers. If a customer is interested in anything that you have to offer, then you can start a proposal and send that out to the customer. If the customer accepts that proposal, you can then work securely with that customer inside of their customer account with limited IAM privileges. When the work has been completed, then of course you will get paid for that work. So it's a great way to get started in AWS and start earning money from that very valuable certification that you've gained. So that brings us to the end of our lecture on cloud economics and how to create a business case for AWS. Now, this is one of the most important lectures for the exam, so make sure that you understand all of the concepts that are detailed here. I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Welcome back to Backspace Academy. In this lecture, I'm going to talk about what it means to be an architect using AWS services. I'll talk about where we can find information that will help us to provide the best solutions for our stakeholders. This includes the AWS well-architected framework, and that helps us to define exactly what a good architecture looks like. We'll talk about reference architectures, including ones that have CloudFormation templates that will allow us to launch complete architectures, very complex architectures, with a very simple click of a button. And finally, we'll discuss the various compliance services that are available with AWS that can help us to navigate through many difficult compliance processes. Now, the best place to start is with the AWS Architecture Center. And you get there by going to the AWS domain and then /architecture. This is a starting point for all of your information that you need to know about AWS. We've got at the top there, reference architectures. I'll just open one up in a new tab. So they're very complex and detailed architecture. And most of these are in PDF format and define and describe the architecture for you to implement. Now, some of these also have a GitHub repository, and that includes a CloudFormation template. And that will allow you to launch these very complex architectures yourself simply by clicking a button. Now, let's just say we want to implement an enterprise scale WordPress architecture. Let's search for WordPress, and there we go. We've got one ready to go. Now, this one's different because it has code, and that code will be a CloudFormation template. So let's open that up and have a look. So this has now taken me to a GitHub repository of the code for that CloudFormation template. So if I click on templates here, we can see here we've got a whole heap of YAML CloudFormation templates. We've got one here that's a master, and if we open that up, we can see here it's a stack to deploy a highly available, elastic, scalable WordPress environment. I'll just go back again. And we can see here all of the sub CloudFormation templates there as well. So we've got ones for setting up the VPC, for the security groups, for the EFS file system, for the Elasticache. So they will set up all of those individual steps within that CloudFormation template. So let's go back to the main page for this. And we'll scroll down. And here we can see it's got a very complex architecture diagram there for us. So we'll just open that up. Okay, so there we can see it's a very complex architecture, and to do this on your own would take quite a significant amount of time, and you could also introduce a lot of errors as opposed to having all of this architecture implemented as code and your infrastructure managed as code. Now, up until now, we have been installing or launching WordPress instances as a single instance. And that single instance contains the file storage for all of our media files, being our pictures, our documents, our videos, anything that we're going to be using within that WordPress application. And also, that single instance will contain the MySQL database as well. The problem that creates when we go to an auto-scaling multi-instance environment is that because the database and the file server are not centrally located, each one of those instances will have a different copy or a different version of that data. So when a new instance is launched, that will not have any of the data that is in another instance. And so every time that a customer comes through the load balancer and gets directed to an instance, that it will be totally different experience the next time they go through the load balancer and get directed to a different instance. So we need a way of centrally managing all of our media files and all of our data. So here we can see we've got an Amazon EFS share that has been created, and that will centrally locate all of that media storage. And we have an EFS mount target. So those WordPress instances can access all of that data, all of those media files that are in that EFS share. And so that solves that problem for our media files. Then we look at our database. So we no longer have the database located on our individual instances. The database is now on Amazon Aurora, and it also has a read replica, which is going to help for durability and for speed for our read requests. So now all of a sudden our data is also centrally located. So any new instances that are launched, they will be using that same data and the same media storage as well. So, of course, to do that all yourself is going to be quite difficult. So it's certainly something to consider, is to go to those, if you're going to install something like this, to search for it as a starting point at the very least and get those best practices sorted out. So let's just jump back into the AWS Architecture site to just close out of this. And here we can see we've got the AWS well-architected framework. And that helps you to build architecture around AWS best practices. It provides a framework for you to work in. It's very high level, it's very generic, and it's not prescriptive as such, but it does get you thinking in the right areas. So let's have a look at that. So what it's built around are 5 pillars of excellence, being operational excellence, security, reliability, performance efficiency, and cost optimization. So when we talk about operational excellence, we need to make sure that we've got our processes designed like we would have in any other good business process. We need to make sure that our architecture is implemented as code. We're using CloudFormation templates or something like that that defines our architecture and has version control around that architecture. We're taking advantage of automation to streamline and to reduce waste, just the same as we would with any other good business process. Security, making sure users are granted least privilege. In other words, they only have access to the minimum that they need. Implementing CloudTrail to track user activity and CloudWatch to alert us to any issues. Creating a VPC architecture that is robust and has multiple layers of security. Reliability. Implementing a highly available and fault-tolerant architecture that can respond to demand, both long-term demand and spikes in demand. Performance efficiency. Making sure that we're getting the most out of those resources. They're not sitting around doing nothing. We don't have EC2 instances and EBS volumes that we're paying for and we're not using. And finally, we've got cost optimization, making sure that we get the right solution for our budget. It's no point designing something that's massive and complicated and expensive if it's just not going to be economical to do that. We might be able to go to a lower cost solution, such as designing a static website using CloudFront, rather than having large servers that cost a great deal of money. Now, to help us along the way, there's actually an AWS well-architected tool, and there's a link to it up here. So I'll just open that up now. How it works is, again, we go through those 5 pillars of excellence, and it will ask you a series of questions. And it's a bit like a benchmarking process. It helps you to identify where you are now and what you need to do to achieve AWS best practices. You define your workload first, and then you'll go through and you'll answer all of these questions relating to the 5 pillars. Once you've done that, you can save that as a milestone. And then you can come back when you've fixed up all of the issues that have been identified, and then go back and redo the architected tool, put in another milestone until you get to the point where you're completely satisfied that you've taken into consideration everything of this well-architected framework and that you're satisfied that you're achieving AWS best practices. And then you can print out a report. And that is great for going to clients and saying, well, look, this is what we've taken into consideration with your architecture. And we've come up with a solution that is based upon AWS best practices on a number of different areas. And this is what we have come up with. So it's not only a great design tool, it's also a great marketing tool as well. Okay, so we've got these great tools. We've got this great framework. How do we learn more about implementing it specific for our use case? So the best way is to just go back to the AWS well-architected website, which we were looking at before, scroll down past those 5 pillars, and we come to the AWS well-architected lens. So this is going to go more in depth, in detail, into a specific area. So let's have a look at one of those. So just look at the machine learning one. So here we can see we've got the pillars redefined there, and then it goes into the machine learning process lifecycle, and it defines business goal, the machine learning problem framing, data processing. Then it will go into the design principles of well-architected, and then we go into implementing this for the well-architected framework. So we'll just expand this here. And again, we're going into business goal identification, machine learning problem framing, as was defined in that well-architected machine learning lifecycle. And it will define what you need to do in regards to operational excellence, security, reliability, performance, cost, those 5 pillars. And it will define what you need to do to achieve that. And so there we can see how to achieve that part of the operational best practice, that design principle of that operational excellence best practice pillar. Also, if we go down a little bit further, it's got references there. So if you want to know more about a specific area, then that is what you can do. What it also has here, and it's probably the most relevant of all of the documentation here, is the best practices arranged by pillar. So when you do your well-architected tool and you've identified that in MLOE01 you're deficient in that, you can go into here and you can see exactly what you can do specifically for a machine learning application. And so that's very good. The well-architected tool will be very vague, but this will be more specific for what you need to do. Okay, so that's all I'll discuss now on the AWS well-architected framework. What I want to talk about now is how do we create an architecture that might be compliant with a certain framework, such as HIPAA or PCI DSS or some other framework that we need to make sure that it fits in with. So the best place to start is the AWS Compliance homepage. So we go to the AWS domain and we do /compliance on the end of that. And there we have the AWS Compliance homepage. So it has links to white papers there. And I'll just scroll down a little bit further. It talks about the shared responsibility model, and we'll learn more about shared responsibility, what we are responsible for and what AWS is responsible for, and how that changes depending on what service and what application we are actually doing. I'll just scroll down a little bit more, and we're going to get to the compliance resources. So I'll just click on those now. There's a Cloud Audit Academy, so you can sign up for a course with AWS, and they will give you training in the skills of a professional auditor. There's a compliance solution guide there going into detail on how compliance is implemented on AWS. But the good stuff is further down, where we get into the essentials and best practices. A lot of white papers there specific to compliance, and guides and workbooks, very important here. So we've got a lot of information around specific compliance programs. So if you're looking for information around HIPAA, here it is. If you're looking for information around PCI DSS, that is here as well. We'll scroll down a little bit further, and we've also got information around privacy compliance as well. Now, if you're looking for a copy of any compliance documentation that AWS has that you require, you can go to the AWS Artifact website. So you go to that, just go to the AWS domain /artifact. So I'm just going to click on Getting Started with Artifact. Okay, so here it takes me to the AWS console and the Artifact Management Console here. So let's have a look at viewing some reports. So I just click on View Reports, and I'll just search for PCI maybe. So there we have, there's the PCI attestation of compliance. Let's have a look at downloading that report. So that's downloaded. Let's have a look at it. Okay, so it's only got one page here. It doesn't have the actual documentation. So what we need to do is we need to open this into Adobe Reader to be able to see the paperclip that's attached to this. And then what we can do is simply click on that. What we've got here is a terms and conditions page that we're supposed to read before we download any of this stuff. I'm just going to open up this in Adobe Reader and see what we get. Okay, I've just opened that up in my reader, and now I can see here under the paperclip, I've got these two documents, and I'm just going to click on those. And when I do that, it's going to connect to AWS and it's going to download that document. So it's just coming in now. Okay, so there's that document there that we were looking for. And we can go through and we can see that it's exactly what we're after. So that brings us to the end of the lecture. It's a very important one. So make sure that you go to the AWS Architecture website, check it all out, go and have a look at some of these reference architecture examples. You're not going to be expected to know them because there's 200 or 300 of them, but just have a look and see how you can get access to these architectures. Have a look at the well-architected framework and those 5 pillars. Have a look at the compliance resources. Go to AWS Artifact and see if you can download some documentation out of that as well. So I hope you got a lot out of it, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.